Welcome everyone. My name is Elizabeth. I'm the head of community at Grid 110, which is a startup accelerator in Los Angeles that supports early stage entrepreneurs. I absolutely love my job and my role supporting and building community. And I have to say, I put together this event kind of selfishly because there's not a lot of us, like there's not a lot of community builders, community leaders in the space, especially not in the startup and venture space. So I wanted to learn from the best and reached out to some of the brands and organizations that I've been looking up to that I think have built incredible communities themselves, and wanted to hear from them on like, how do I do a better job at my job? And how can we also help other founders? I know when you are starting your company, building a community around your product, around your service is really crucial, whether you're getting a community of your first 10 customers or trying to scale. So we're going to talk about some really exciting things today. We will start off with just basic introductions so you know who is in the virtual room. So we'll kick it off with Julia, and then we can just popcorn around. But if you could share a little bit about yourself, your role, what you do, and then also a little bit about the community that you're representing today.
Yeah, first, Elizabeth, thank you so much for having us here. Super excited. So I'm Julia. I'm First Round's Senior Community Manager. And for those of you who don't know, First Round is a seed stage venture firm. So basically, we're investing at the earliest point in a company. And overall, in my role, I really work to think about how our founders and how their teams can both share knowledge and build connections with each other. So, at a super early stage company, if it's a team of 5, 10 people, there's not a lot of people to necessarily go to learn from, build knowledge. So we try to provide that for our founders and their teams. And I do that via a variety of different programs, which I'll go into. And then besides that, I've been at First Round for about 1.5 years now. I just moved to San Francisco. So if any of you are in the audience, we should meet up. And just excited to be here. And I'll popcorn it to Kyle.
Yes. What's up, everyone? Super pumped to be here. My name is Kyle Hagge. I work for Morning Brew. I'm the community editor. No one knows what that means. Maybe we don't even, but you can think of it as the lead community manager for our educational products. We have one currently. It's called the Morning Brew Accelerator. It's an 8-week virtual experience. We put 150 professionals through it, really designed to help accelerate their careers, but we're also building other educational products as we speak that I'm super pumped about. And then also solidarity to everyone with their cameras on, so we're not the only floating heads up here. Respect. I'm in New York, so the same thing that Julia said, if anyone's interested in grabbing coffee, talking about community, definitely open to doing that, and super pumped to be here. So thank you to Grid 110 and Elizabeth for setting this up. And I'll pop it over to the other Minneapolis, Minnesota native, Sun Woo. I'm also from Minnesota, so shout out to any Minnesota people.
Heck yeah, I love it. Thanks, Elizabeth, for having us. Super excited. Yeah, so everyone, hi, my name is Sun Woo. I am from Minnesota, as Kyle said, and I lead platform at Gen Z VCs. Gen Z VCs is the largest and fastest growing community for Gen Zers in tech and VC and entrepreneurship. And it's just a super energetic and fun community that I honestly have learned so much from. So excited to share with you all today and be here.
Tell us about your newsletter.
Oh gosh, yeah. So I recently started a newsletter called hanaro.vc, and it's focused around the South Korean VC and startup community. And just launched it last quarter, and there's another one going out the end of this year. So super pumped. There's a lot of different initiatives going on. So I definitely love community and excited to jam with everyone here on that today.
Clearly, you're a natural. I'm so excited to hear from you all. Let's start from the very beginning. I mean, I have so many questions, but let's start from the beginning. How do you define a successful community? I mean, also what differentiates like a community from a group? or like a community from like just a bunch of customers that you have or people that follow you? Like, what makes a community? Open to anyone.
I can kick us off. So the way I've heard it described, and probably that informs my thinking the most, is differentiating between audience and community. I think, when Morning Brew says we have 3 million subscribers to the main newsletter, I would define that more as an audience, which is typically like one to many, where you have some information you're presenting to a lot of people, but there isn't a lot of back and forth communication. I do think Morning Brew does a good job at that as well, particularly on social. But for me, community is really many to many, where you have a group of people that are learning from each other, and not just one person. And so there is a real sense of back and forth. And I think there's probably a lot of elements to that. I think an important one I'll just bring up here as well is shared language. So in the Accelerator program, we have a lot of terms that I think if you're in the community, you start to really identify with. We have board meetings, we have decision dossiers, which are like updated case studies. So I think great communities have this sense of shared language that brings people closer together as well.
Anyone else want to chime in?
Yeah, I think I plus one to everything Kyle said. I think the one to many versus many to many is really something I think about, and I really try to think about this in every aspect of my community. So whether it is an event to different programs, I really try to think about how to make it a community feel rather than a one to many feel in every aspect I'm doing. So one example could be just with an event. How can I make an event not a webinar? So how can I make it a real interactive experience, whether that means using polls or the chat or live Q&A or breakouts, really making it to a many experience rather than to one speaker talking to many people in a webinar format.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and kind of elaborating on what Julia and Kyle both have shared. Personally, for me, it's kind of like realizing that everyone kind of interacts in a different way. Not everyone is going to be, the most active on like Slack or whatever, different social platform that you're using. So I think just kind of being really open and understanding that people have different, languages that they communicate through is super important to kind of building a community that's not just like for like a specific group of people or another.
How do you think like this remote environment has changed all of that? Because I remember pre-COVID doing a lot of events, like and our Accelerator program was in person here in LA. So it was a lot easier to connect with founders and build relationships. And it's been a different environment. How have you all navigated that? Or how do you build a community like in a virtual environment?
I think Gen Z VCs is kind of like a perfect use case for that because we're coming up on our 1 year, COVID just had started. And Megan was, doing user interviews like kind of through COVID, really, like when we all had that free time. We all know there's like nothing else to do. Like it's kind of like, how do you use up your time other than baking banana bread and like doing everything on TikTok? So honestly, I think being online was like really powerful for us in terms of growth because you see all that growth via Twitter. You see, growth via Slack, and it's, you can really quantitatively see it versus, who knows if we would have had the growth that we did if it wasn't an online virtual format.
That's a really good point. It's almost like there's more opportunity or you're able to reach a bigger audience just because a lot of us are more online.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I also think I have only ever been an online community builder for the past 4 years or so, only ever online. And I think what's really interesting now though with COVID, specifically for first round, is a lot of our program we used to really do it based on the two major hubs, San Francisco, New York City. But now with everything being remote, I think it's been amazing to really be able to include so many more people, not just from across the country, but really around the world, and really able to spread that community magic more and more. And then I think another really interesting aspect with everything being online is just the ability to scale. I think it is a lot easier to scale when community is online because you can utilize more tools, which I'm sure we'll get more into. And I think that's been really interesting to see that growth as well.
Mhm.
Yeah, I think these are all great points that Julia and Sunwoo brought up. I think you do probably have to be more intentional about it virtually because people aren't inhabiting some shared physical space. But I think it does present a lot of opportunities. Again, going just like the amount of people you can connect with. Our program has participants all across the country, and it wouldn't if we, limited it only to New York. So virtual allows that scale. What I think is really cool is like when you can, it's not necessarily like an either or. It doesn't have to be virtual or in person. I think the best communities are hybrid and will be going forward. So we have this cool thing where we have 150 professionals from all across the country that are in this community together, but then they're able to form like sub communities or little mini groups where we have 3 people in Portland, they're going to get together for brunch. That's awesome. We got 10 people in Chicago, they're going to get rooftop drinks. That's great. When you can go from URL to IRL, I think that's a really powerful sign for your community.
All right. A few other questions that we received, and I love these because these are all very practical, tactical questions. What are some platforms or resources or like digital places, physical places, anything that you utilize on a regular basis where you build community? Like what are some resources, platforms?
I can mention a few that we use for the Morning Brew Accelerator. The first, we actually use circle.so. I know a lot of communities are on Slack. Circle is, I would say, like Slack meets Facebook groups. A big fan of that. I think it actually kind of slows down. Slack can be like pretty quick sometimes, which has its pros, but also has its cons. So circle.so. And then the other resource I would say is there's something called Fast Friends Protocol, which like if you're a community builder, definitely check out. It's a lot of research went into questions that get people to feel like they know each other faster, hence the name Fast Friends Protocol. So we do those in a lot of breakout sessions, and you would be amazed at like the connections that can form in a 5-minute breakout session when you implement some of these questions. So those would be 2 resources I would encourage every community builder to check out.
For Gen Z VCs, like Slack is our home. We really like using Slack. And we've thought about moving to different communities or kind of implementing other platforms as well, but haven't really got around to it yet. Still kind of brainstorming that. But a couple platforms I really like right now, just personally, is Ladder and Upstream. If you guys haven't checked it out, definitely do so. They have great like pitch sessions and different entrepreneur, investor sessions as well. So super awesome, super duper cool.
And then, really quick for you both, do you mind putting it in the chat so that way we can share all of the resources out afterwards? Because I don't think I've heard of any of that. Well, except obviously for Slack, but I'm like, well, this is what I'm here for, taking notes.
And then for first round, we use a variety of different platforms. So we have a platform similar to like a Mobilize or Circle called First Round Network. So this is a tool that our engineering team built, and it's more of an asynchronous Q&A like platform where people can ask questions and share advice, get access to our community members, our library of resources. Then we also utilize Luma. I think that's how all of you got here today, which is great. And they also have a community feature, which is really amazing, where you can actually make a community, have a directory, have a resource library, and it's really interesting. And then we also utilize Orbit, double I, for coffee chats, which has been a really great way to scale our introductions to community members. So those are a few of the tools, but I think one thing to think about before just like looking up these tools and being like, should I use this, is really thinking about what is your community strategy. So for example, some questions to ask are, do you want your community to be asynchronous or synchronous? Like Slack versus Circle. Do you want your community to be something where the answers live on there forever? So with Slack, it's a lot more difficult to search for previous responses compared to Circle or other sites. And then I'd also really think about like, who are your community members? Is it going to be a lot easier to meet them where they already are, whether that is on Slack or Facebook or even WhatsApp? Or does it make sense to have a new platform knowing that conversion may be lower because they maybe don't have an account on that platform? They don't go there on the daily. So I think before like jumping in and saying, hey, this is the tool I want, like thinking about what is your strategy and then going from there.
That is such a good point. Yeah, we've been, our community has been living on Slack for as long as I remember, but that's a really good point about you just, I mean, there's so much that can happen in just an hour of Slack that it's hard to like search. So that's a really good point. Another question that we received is, how do you start from zero? Like, let's say, I know we have a lot of founders in the audience, but if they have a product or service or a company and their goal is to build a strong community around their product, like, where do they start? What are some basics?
I think for me, it kind of, I just really stress like quality over quantity. And you know, like maybe you do take like 20 calls with people that are potential fits for a community that you're building, or potential customers, people you're trying to really target, but not all 20 are, you know, might be who you think they are. So really just kind of narrowing down maybe like 5 to 10 people from that, I think has been super beneficial for me personally. Like I met Elizabeth and she's been a super connector and super awesome. So definitely an amazing community driven person where we can kind of connect on things that I can't with other people.
Oh, thank you. Same to you. Same to you. Yeah, Julia, were you gonna say something?
Yeah, I also agree with Samu, just really like thinking about quality, not quantity, and starting small. Even if that means you just have a few users. And I think one thing that's important that I just always remind people of is really like, before just putting in different solutions, hey, let's do coffee chats, hey, let's do these events, like actually see what your community members need and want, and talk to them, because then you'll be able to best support them and also hopefully grow that user base.
Yeah. And the other thing I'll add is, I think it's important to have maybe some sort of filter on like who you think you want in your community. I think it's okay to have like a spiky point of view and have kind of like a flag in the ground of what you stand for, which is going to help attract the right types of people for your product, for whatever you're building. Like for the Accelerator, we're really adamant that we do think that you can learn from anyone, and we have like C-suite people that are in marketing, learning from people right out of college that are in sales. And that is core to what we think education should be. And if people don't think that that is for them, that's totally fine. But that helps us actually attract people that are going to push our mission forward. So I think it's okay to not have everyone in your community. In fact, that's going to be more beneficial in the long run.
These are such a good tips. A few other questions. So we got a lot of questions around like, how do I get started? I don't have any, I don't really have a sense of community with my company. But then we also got questions that were focused on like, okay, I kind of a community, but how do I take it to the next level? How do I scale it? Like, how do I like 10x this? Yeah, if anyone has any insights.
Yeah,
Asking for personal reasons.
Yeah, I can jump in here. I think for me, this is where I've spent the majority of my time, is really thinking about scaling and how to work smarter, not harder, because it's definitely tough. And I think what I try to think about is like, what are ways that I can automate more within my community? What are ways that I can just really save time? So basically, one, I think, simple thing that you can do is go look at your calendar or go look at your to-dos and see what are just automated and repeated every time. So for example, for me, I was sending manual reminder emails for events, and it would just take a ton of time. So now, working smarter, not harder, I use Luma, and it's very easy to just copy paste the same message and Luma can send out those reminders. Or another aspect is just like how to think through using like Zapier and Airtable has really been helpful. And really, I think just taking a look at your calendar, seeing what you do again and again, that sort of like feels tedious, and thinking about how can I make this either automated, how can I do it in a faster way, or can I find a tool to do it for me? And taking it from there.
Yeah, I love everything Julia said. I would say, I think like an important part of scaling a community, particularly if you are a community manager, is probably finding a way where you can take yourself out of the equation and that the community can be self-sustaining. So you want to empower people, you know, maybe with directories, with tools, coffee chats, automations, like Julia said, but also like with that, you do need to set some guidelines and expectations of how people should be interacting in the community. But I think a great community is not a community that's relying on one person really driving everything. You want people to feel like we're all creating this community together. So really think of ways that you can empower members of your community to take on those roles that maybe you would otherwise be doing, would be my advice.
Diving kind of deeper into that, for Gen Z VCs, at least, like we've implemented tools along the way that maybe like will passively help people. But for example, like we have a job board that, you know, our community members can go to find jobs and connect with other people in the industry that they're interested in. And even like different events kind of help people to get more excited about the community that you're building. Like we recently had the Gen Z VC Summit, which was super awesome, super fun. So just kind of continuing to ride the momentum as well.
I think, Julia, you're the one who mentioned like also asking your community or the people that are in your community, even ask what they even want. This happened to me at Grid 110, where I mean, I always have a bunch of ideas of what I think we should do. But then we asked our founders what they were interested in or what they wanted to see more of. And some of the ideas I had never thought of, I had never even considered, or I didn't even know that was something that, you know, that our founders would enjoy or get value out of. So ask them, because they probably know better than you do. And I love Kyle's point about you just don't want it to depend on either yourself or just one person. You want it to grow and thrive on its own, and provide like a foundation for that. So I love that. Let's see, what other questions did we get? Oh, this is a good one. How do you retain the attention of community members? How do you keep them engaged? Do you have any tactics or strategies?
I can't remember who it was. It was either Julia or someone, obviously, that said before, like having lots of different ways that they can interact in the community. I think that's really important. Just understanding that not everyone's going to like the same method of communication that you like or you assume that they like. So for MBA, for example, once they do graduate from the program, they go to alumni community. We actually move them off Circle. They're onto Slack. But we have, I think I can say this, like Morning Brew has an exclusive newsletter that goes to only alums called Alumni Brew. And so like we have that method of communication, we have Slack, we have people being able to sign up for coffee chats. And so there's all these different ways that you can participate in the community. And I think that's really key to retention, is if you only do events, you're only going to get people that love events in your community. But giving people lots of different ways to interact with each other in different mediums, so everyone feels comfortable with one of those, I think is the key to retaining a great community.
I agree. I think definitely offering a variety of different touch points, like even just for one example, we offer 2 different types of networking opportunities. One type is gather round. I can drop the link in, which is more of speed networking, and then Orbit, which is more of one-to-one coffee chat. So that just sort of caters to different personalities and different folks who want to meet different types of people in different ways. And then I think the other aspect that we also do is we also have different touch points with our community. So even if they're not necessarily joining in on those many experiences, we do have a weekly newsletter. We do have other ways that we're communicating with them so that we do have those touch points to continue to involve them.
Yeah, I think Julia and Kyle covered that one beautifully.
Very beautifully indeed. And I love gather around and a few of the other ones that were mentioned. Luma, I'm a big fan of. I mean, once I started Luma, I feel like my life just got a lot easier, and my job, and love gather around as well. We got a juicy question here, which is, what is your biggest mistake as you were building your community? Any like lessons that you learned, or just things that you're like, well, lesson learned?
Yeah, I think, I mean, I've made many mistakes, but the one that definitely stands out the most is, we all go through our life kind of thinking that people view the world semi the same as us, or like the same type of engagement. I'm probably on the like enthusiastic side of things. And so interacting with members of the community, like, sometimes they're just gonna be like, thanks. And I'm like, did I do something wrong? Like, well, did they not like the experience? That might just be their mode of communication. Maybe they're more straight to the point. And like, you have to be okay with that. Otherwise you're going to like force it a bit and put people in situations where like, they're like, this isn't really how I want to communicate. So like I was saying before, just like having lots of different avenues where people can show up authentically, be who they are, and that's cool, is really important. And not trying to create a community that's like just in your self-image is really important.
I think for me, I don't necessarily know if it's a mistake, but just like things I learned that I'm like, damn, I should have known before. One is in terms of, again, like working smarter, not harder. Like the number of times I've received the same email with the same question. And then like a year later, I'm like, why don't I put together an FAQ of these questions? Or another thing is, for like months, I'd write this newsletter where I would, at the very end, I'd say, please reach out if you want to do a coffee chat. No one would ever follow up for a coffee chat. This is like months. I'm like, okay, I really want to meet community members. I only get 1 or 2 people, whatever. So then like one week I'm like, you know what? I'm going to just rebrand this event, call it Julia's office hours, put it in the event section, 15 minutes. I had like 4 jam-packed days of 15-minute meetings. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I sort of regret this because I didn't realize how crazy the signups would be. But I learned 2 things. 1, branding is, again, everything. And 2, I actually had the best time meeting my community members. So going back to like when you're thinking about scaling communities, I think when you're scaling, it can be difficult to have those like very personal touch points with community members in person. And I think having those office hours for me just really like empowered and motivated me to keep going. So those are two key learnings. I don't know if they were mistakes, but just, yeah.
I would say I'm kind of on the spectrum where I make mistakes every single day. Um, I honestly can't even count how many mistakes I've made today. Probably the biggest one being I was almost late for my midterm earlier. But it's okay because we made it in time. But honestly, I think one big thing that I was thinking about was not reaching out to people sooner. So like Elizabeth, like when we connected on LinkedIn, like I'm like, why didn't I reach out to her sooner? Like I totally like
Oh, I was
totally
thinking the same thing too. Don't worry.
I was like, I totally went through
Yeah.
her profile and I totally was like, oh, this is the coolest person ever. Like, definitely need to find the time to chat. But I just like kind of forgot about it almost. I don't know why. It just kind of blew past my head. But it's like we got an out call and it's like we made such a good connection. I'm like, why didn't I just do this like maybe a week or two before? So that's something that I think I'm working on right now.
I think you I think you're good. I'm like, yeah. Um, because I felt the same way. I'm like, I just feel like there's always like more that I can do, especially as a community builder or leader. There's so many resources, so many platforms to check out, like so many members, so many things that you can do that yeah, we're doing the best that we can. I actually have kind of like the opposite question to that, which is like, what has been your favorite like, community moment or like moment, experience, situation that either you facilitated or you helped facilitate or like, and it makes me think of like personal touch points because I go to 110, especially when I started early on in building community. I always wanted to make sure that I created these little experiences or moments for our founders to feel seen and feel special and feel supported. But those can also often be like fluffy buzzwords. So like how do you actually support founders in a very practical way, or your community members?
I can dive in here. I think for me, the biggest thing has just been asking what they want and asking what is going to be most beneficial to them. And sure, like they might not know, but they have a better idea than I might, because again, like what Kyle was saying, not everyone views the world the same as I do. And just kind of, putting yourself in their shoes and just kind of figuring out like what you can give. I feel like that's really important about community is like always giving and really not expecting anything back. But honestly, like that has been super beneficial. But if Kyle or Julia, you guys want to chime in here?
Yeah, I think in terms of helping founders, I think in addition to asking for like how we can best support them, I also think it's really helpful to ask for their problems and their biggest challenges, because I think even if they don't know the solutions, you can put together ideas for them. So just having an understanding of like where are their current needs and how can we fill and serve them is very important. And then in terms of my favorite community experience, I guess going back to the other question you had, I honestly think for me, like I love connecting with community members one-to-one. Like I just have the best time, especially when they come to me with a certain problem or challenge or goal and we're able to work through it together. I love that. And I just love building the deeper connections, especially over time where, hey, maybe coffee chat one, I don't know them too well, but then like a year later, we've had a few more coffee chats and it's just like I've seen their growth, I've seen what they're doing, we're friends, and I love that.
Yeah, my biggest highlight is definitely we have an element called board meetings, which I think I was talking about earlier, where we put people together in groups around kind of shared experiences and they talk about shared professional challenges. And they're huge hits during the program. They do 4 of them in the 8 weeks. But what I think has been the highlight is I'll catch up with someone that has graduated and is an alum now. And they're like, hey, yeah, I just actually last week got together with my group. We had another board meeting together. And seeing, kind of this idea that you had in your community, actual community members run with, start doing on their own, continue those connections. That's like, wow, that's pretty damn cool. Like, we provided something that gave people this structure to really help them through a challenge or whatever is going on in their life. And they've continued those connections with other community members is really special. And I think that's what it's all about. So that's a huge highlight for me.
Oh, I love that. We have something very similar at Grid 110. We have something called, I think it might just be a different name, but we have accountability groups. So within our Accelerator program, we put our founders into small groups of like 5 to 6 founders, and they meet once a week and just talk about like the challenges and the journey of entrepreneurship. And they often end up meeting post program, and I have groups that were formed 2-3 years ago, and they still meet and have dinner and send me pictures, and it's really cute. And at least for me, like being on the other side or being on the like facilitating it, it's so meaningful. I feel like there's no other feeling than knowing that you've had some kind of impact in, other people's success and then blossoming. It's pretty great. Okay, I do want to get through some of the questions that any of the people have that are joining us live. So if you have any questions regarding community building, please put them in the chat, and we will spend the rest of the time going through them. I did see one question that I was curious about as well, which I might have to scroll a little bit. But somebody asked, what are some of your favorite consumer-based startups that you're excited about, or other brands, other communities that you look up to or think that they've done a really good job?
I'm going to give a huge shout out to Thing Testing. Let me drop the link. Definitely one of my favorites. Yeah, definitely one of my favorites. Definitely check them out. Give me 1 second to drop it in the chat.
That is one of my favorites as well.
I think for me, I am a little biased because these are some first-round companies, but I am just really excited about them. One is called Grow. I'm Greg, which is a plant-based app to help you grow your plants. So that's just exciting because you're able to name your plants, connect with other community members who are also passionate about plants, and it's really interesting. And then the other startup is called Maven. So this is cohort-based classes, really great way to learn from amazing instructors and meet other folks in the courses. So I think they're both just taking two totally different community-based approaches, but really interesting in the community space.
I have one that does some work with the Accelerator. We have one like decision dossier case study around basically like coming up with investment memos that you would pitch to partners at a VC fund. And this one is called AgriCycle. And I think they're doing really interesting stuff with communities around eliminating food waste, particularly in like extremely impoverished areas. And so if you like dried fruit, check out AgriCycle Global because they have a brand called Jolly Fruit, and it's dope. I'll let you look at the website and figure it out, but that's a startup that I'm really passionate about.
I mean, I'm pretty passionate about all of the organizations that are represented here. I was like, this is a pretty awesome panel of like truly not only experts, but people who are passionate about building community and who do it every day. Another question that we got was, what are some metrics that you use to measure the success of community?
I'm happy to start what we do with MBA. I think there's like this idea that a lot of people are like, oh, you can't measure community or it's like ephemeral. And I think there's some truth to that, but I do think like at the end of the day, like you need to have ways to measure outcomes and prove that what you're doing is effective. So I would say if you are a community builder, like you're going to have to lean a little bit into the data. Like we do take NPS scores of everyone that goes through our program. We explicitly ask them like, how closely connected do you feel to the community? What is your sense of community? We really look at those numbers and figure out what are the levers we can pull to increase that. The other thing I would say for like community is how many people in your community are like showing up to events as a percentage. If you're like throwing all these events, but 10% of people that you consider in your community are coming, maybe there's a lack of like enthusiasm, or there's a disconnect between how closely people are feeling to that community. So yeah, I mean, NPS, or just asking questions like 1 to 10 scale, and then a percentage of how many people are showing up to events, signing up for coffee chats, et cetera, are what we use to measure.
Yeah, I think that this is a really important question, and also just such a difficult question as well in community. I think a few things that we look at. So first, on like the program side of things, when we're actually running programs, one is, as Kyle mentioned, NPS. And then 2 is actually like with NPS, like, did they actually go and refer a friend? Like, did they actually nominate someone? It's one thing to just select a number, but did they go do it? 2 is in terms of our programs, we also just see like how active are they within the program. So for example, we run a mentorship program. People are supposed to meet 6 times. At the end of the program, how often did they actually meet? That's another thing. Another thing is after the program, we think about some big questions, including, so for example, going back to the mentorship program, have you met with your mentor? Did you meet with your mentorship program 6 months after the program ended, a year after the program ended? Like, see if there was any long-term impact to really see how it's going. Another aspect is, did any of those mentors join again? Did any of those mentees join again, but as a mentor? Like, I think there's ways to see impact through that. And last but not least, like, how is this program, is there any other value adds to your organization? So for example, with first round mentors, sometimes mentors will then go and apply for jobs at first round companies. So that's a separate value add, but what value adds could you have? So for example, with Morning Brew, how many of those people ended up being new subscribers, or told their friends and referred other people? There's other ways to think about it. And then in terms of like switching gears to the online community aspect, like the actual forum, we look at a variety of different metrics, one including daily active users, thinking about this over time, number of questions and answers being posted, number of people who are actually engaging on the platform versus being what we call lurkers. So that means they're logging on but not doing anything. So those are just some metrics that we look into, but I think overall it's really tough. And I think what I've noticed is that sometimes the biggest impact from community, I mean, it's really like a long game. Like when someone emails me a year after the mentorship program and say, hey, I got that promotion because of my mentor, or I did this, my manager gave me great feedback because of my mentor, and it's so much later. There's just so much impact that you can't get right away like you can with other functions.
I think that covers a good portion of how to measure, growth in community. And it's definitely something that to think about, really. It's hard because it's like the numbers quantitatively that show up, like how many Slack messages or et cetera, or how many daily active users, not always reflect like the engagement within the community or like the impact that somebody might feel. So for me, it's like talking to people one-on-one and really seeing like how has Gen Z VCs been impactful for you? Is it like, has our job board been helpful for you? Have you been able to find an internship through Ballot, which is the platform we use for our job board? Or did you learn something from the Gen Z VC Summit? What are some key takeaways that you've taken and are applying to your life now? So kind of like not necessarily like numbers, I think for me personally, but kind of like the other like value aspect of like, what are you gaining from this community as a person? How are you growing from what we're giving, and the resources that are out there?
So there are definitely, what I'm hearing is different ways to go about it, different things that you can measure. I feel like we're kind of somewhere in between. We have a huge focus at Gordon, we have a huge focus on like some of the stuff that you just can't measure, like, you know, like the true impact on someone's life or someone's business. But then we do measure, some things are easier to measure, or some things are more tangible. So it's kind of like an art and a science also, I feel like. We have a couple of more minutes, so if anyone has any other questions, feel free to put them in the chat. We want to help you, we want to give you advice, and support you in your own journey. So feel free to put your questions, scenarios in the chat. I might have some questions as well. We had one other question that was, how do you have community members contribute without necessarily asking them?
So this is something that we're always trying to think and work through. So outside of asking, which we definitely do, I think one thing that we think about is with our platform specifically is like gamification. So if you post X number of answers, you'll receive this swag item from first round. And I think Morning Brew does similar things with like getting referrals and everything. So I think that's one aspect we do, is really just thinking about gamification. And I also think the other thing is we do have like, you can like answers and you can comment back. So we try to always like people's answers and get my coworkers to like people's answers, because that motivates people, similar to like social media, to go back and post again.
Yeah, I think that's all great advice. I have 3 things that I just wrote down quickly. I think the first is model the way. So you yourself can contribute in a way that you want other community members to contribute, and really show them, like, kind of set expectations of, this is the type of post or the type of content that we want in our community. The second is, like, we've all been in there where like we've thrown a comment out, or we've made a post and then like no one reacts to it, and you're like, damn, what did I fuck up here? What's going on? So like, as community manager, when people post in our community, I always make sure, like, I don't need to be the first one, but if it's been a while and no one's commented, I will leave like what I think is a really thoughtful comment to show that like someone is reading this, that we do really appreciate your effort. And then the third thing that I do is I do like weekly videos that kind of summarize how this last week went, and what we're going to look forward to in the next week. And part of those videos are shout outs of people that have contributed. And so to Julia's point, like, maybe not strictly gamification, but it's a sense of like, someone is watching and someone's giving me like credit and love for participating, only incentivizes people to continue to participate. So those would be my 3 pieces of advice.
Tell me more about the video strategy, because I don't think I've heard that.
Yeah,
is that like for
grind.
everyone? Does it go like that? Sounds like a lot of work. Is there a way to automate
So,
that? But do you send it out to like everyone, or just like the private community?
yeah, so it's just per cohort. So there's 150 people that go through each cohort. We are running some simultaneously in 2022, but I'll make a video, I'll record for like an hour or so, but it's really like chunked. And then I just edit it in Capwing and post it out. It comes out to be like a 5-minute video. I found them to be very effective. One, it adds a sense of personality, I think, to the community when people can like see a face. But then, yeah, just going back to like the shout outs, I think it sets expectations, get people excited for the next week. So I found videos to be a highly effective medium.
I
I'm gonna
also, one
put
other
my
thing,
thoughts in the quick chat. Sorry.
I think the one other thing I also see with just like being appreciative of community members is something we do. I think that does motivate long-term engagement is just like if someone has a great answer, like I reach out to them and I say, hey, thanks so much for posting that. Or if someone asks a great question in their 20 responses saying, hey, like clearly there was such a need for this question and I really appreciate you taking the time. Like just that added recognition, I think can go a long way.
I think it's kind of based on the what you don't reward often goes like you want to acknowledge and say thank you. And I think it also depends on like what stage you're at in your business or community building, because when you're starting from scratch or when you're at zero, like you have to put so much more emphasis on like the one-on-one connections and really like go out of your way to build trust, essentially to grow it. And it looks a little bit different when you're going from 0 to 10, from like 10 to 1,000. But yeah, anyone else have any tips on differentiating yourself or your community?
Yeah, I think Julia had a great point, and I'll go back to what I was saying earlier. Like, I think it is okay to have this like spiky point of view, like not like inflammatory, but you can have a perspective on what your community is for, who your community is for, and being okay that it is not going to be for everyone. So I would, assess what other groups are out there for expecting mothers, I think was the example, and like what is missing. And that might be surveying other expecting mothers, and then create a community that services those needs. And be okay that it's not for everyone.
That is a good point. I feel like Twitter and Reddit are also good places, like regardless of what your niche is or what your demographic is, to just do a little bit of stalking to figure out like where are moms, like what are the challenges of moms, like, and looking it up or trying to find or joining different community boards and just reading up on what are the challenges, what's missing in other spaces, which I think is a really good point. We got another question, which I'm very curious to learn more about this. But Ben asked, as the world becomes more digital and some would say more separated or individualistic, what role will community play? And I kind of have a follow-up question to that, which is like, what role will like community leaders, community builders play in a professional sense? Because when I started a couple of years ago in the community role, there were no other community builder. I mean, there were other community builders, but not as a profession. It wasn't really a profession. And I feel like now there's more recognition, there's more roles popping up. But what do you think the future is of community and community builders?
I think for kind of looking at this from a VC perspective for startups, something that I really look at is community. Like, do they have enough, like, do they have a strong enough brand or a presence that they can build a really strong community? And honestly, it kind of goes back to the point where it's like being online, you get really lonely. And like, I think we all have experienced that going through like quarantine, and community is so powerful. Like I joined a group, I was like February, and it was all virtual. And I felt super, super ostracized, super lonely. And mainly it was the fact that there wasn't anyone really like me. And I felt like there's kind of a lack of community in a sense. And so, to change that up this year, it's like taking my experiences, I'm now created like community of women within the club to kind of, change, to make sure that people aren't put in the same position that I was. So I feel like in that sense, like that's really important. But yeah, that's just kind of like my thoughts around it, is that community is currently and will be the most important thing going forward, especially in like a hybrid / digital world that we have.
Yeah, I think my take is that we'll see a lot of more niche communities develop because of the internet. I think if you think back to like pre-internet or when we didn't have tools like Zoom, your community was probably like your neighbors. And so like that was the maximum number of people you could really communicate with. Now, theoretically, like you can talk to damn near like 7 billion people. And because of that, I think you can have communities that are really niche, really focused, like on one particular subgenre of another subgenre, and you can find other people that are really passionate about that more easily now than you ever could in the past. And so my advice for people wanting to create a community is like don't be afraid to go niche and use the internet to find other people that are going to be really, really excited about that subgenre as well.
And I would add to like the tips on when you're starting out is just provide value. Provide value. That's what we try to do at Grid 110 is just provide support and resources and a lot of our referrals, a lot of our companies come through word of mouth. So their experience is so great or so impactful that they just go and tell their friends or their family. So yeah, we are coming up at time, but before you jump off, I have one more thing. Wait, I think Julia, you had a question too.
Oh, I'm just curious for the panelists as well as just everyone in the audience with for those of you who have a larger community, how do you stay on top of your community members and actually, keep those relationships going, remember the details? Do you use any, personal CRMs, tools, note-taking strategies, anything?
Google Docs, baby. That's all I'll say.
Is there like a particular way to use Google Docs? Any hacks?
No, I want to hear from you guys on this.
We use Airtable a lot. I think someone put Airtable down here. I would say too, like, don't overestimate the amount of effort that someone needs to feel like you're still kind of checking in on them. Like, I'll go on LinkedIn. If I see someone that like I've interacted with through MBA, that's an automatic like for me. Like, you go. I love that. And just like having people top of mind, like, oh, Kyle liked my stuff. He's thinking of me in some capacity. That's great. Like, you can't write a handwritten letter to like 2,000 people every month. So you got to find the little ways to keep them engaged a bit. There's
a few things that I've done in the past and still do. I think the funniest thing, I do not use a CRM or any kind of software. But what I do is I'll host events like these or workshops like these for Grid 110, and I'll market it out and I'll share it publicly. But then what I'll do is I have a list of our community members, and I can see like the most active ones, and I can see the least active ones, and I can see like when was the last time this person attended an event. And sometimes I'll just go through that list and find people who like haven't been super active recently, and like send them a personalized message and say, hey, so and so, like would love to see if I think that topic or theme is relevant to them, and say, hey, so and so, like I think you would really enjoy this. I would love to see you there, and and send them a message. And one time I had one of our founders say, thanks for reaching out to me. I just want to ask, what kind of software are you using to send these personalized messages? Because I want to use it too. And I'm like, no, that is just me being human. So yeah, I think just reaching out, saying hello, saying like, I'm thinking of you, you're on my mind is very meaningful.